Okay, hey everyone. I think I'm live now and we're good to go. This is David B. And in this live stream, I just want to go through some English idioms. I have a list here, and I'll take the website I'm looking at and I'll put that in the chat if anyone wants to open it and follow along. Okay, so I just started messing around with live streams a little bit, so hopefully everything will go well. I did a test one earlier today, and it turned out okay. So let's jump right into some of these idioms. The first one is a blessing in disguise. So, what does that mean? Well, a blessing is some good that happens to us, but a blessing in disguise would be when something happens to us that at first we think was bad. So, for example, let's say you get fired from your job, but then that gives you the opportunity to go and work at your dream job. You would say that getting fired was a blessing in disguise. It was something that at first seemed bad, but ended up being good. The next one, a dime a dozen. And this is kind of a strange construction for English, but it means that a dime a dozen means you get a dozen things for a dime, meaning you pay a dime. So literally, it means you get 12 things and pay 10 cents. But the meaning of the idiom is that it just means very cheap. So a dime a dozen doesn't literally mean that you got 12 things for 10 cents. It just means that something's very cheap. So let's say you collect baseball cards and you have this card and you say, "Oh, I'm so excited I got this card." And someone would say, "Why are you excited?" Those are a dime a dozen. They're very cheap. They're not worth anything. Why does it matter? Better late than never. This one's pretty straightforward, and it basically means that um, it's better if you show up late rather than if you never showed up at all. So let me see, what's their definition? Yeah, it's pretty self explanatory. So we won't analyze that one too much. Break a leg. This is a saying that you say to someone who is maybe someone who does plays or some kind of live show. If you were to tell them good luck, that would actually be bad luck because you might jinx them. So you tell them break a leg because that would be a bad thing. So it's kind of like a reverse. If you say good luck, it would actually be bad luck. But if you tell them break a leg, that's something bad. So maybe it kind of tricks things and it's actually you telling them good luck without jinxing them. Let's see what else. Cutting corners. Um, Cutting corners basically means you do a job of some kind, but you don't do it the way that you should have. You skip some steps. You're a little bit sloppy with it. So literally, you could imagine, a square or something with a corner. Cutting the corner would literally be you don't do the outline. You cut the corner, and you sometimes hear this phrase. Used literally for like if you're driving and you say, "Oh, I cut the corner," that just means like when you cut the intersection, you went really tight. But when you're talking about cutting corners in terms of building something, it means you skipped some steps. You didn't do it the way that you should have. So it usually has a negative meaning to it. Easy does it. Easy does it just means that. Let's see, what's their definition? They have that it means slow down, but really easy does it is like if someone's doing something and you're telling them to be careful, like don't use too much pressure, something like that. Let's take a look. Go back to the drawing board. Go back to the drawing board means that you basically start something over. And literally, you could imagine if you're designing something, you would start by drawing it out on paper and then try to build it. So if you have to go back to the drawing board, that means, well, it wasn't working out the way that you were trying to do it. So you need to start over again. Hit the sack. Hit the sack means go to bed. So a sack is like a bag of something. we just had Christmas, right? Santa has a sack full of toys. But in this case, sack just means bed. And I'm in my bedroom now, so my bed's right here. So if you say, I'm going to hit the sack, that means I'm going to bed now. To make a long story short, this is one that it's a phrase, but it literally is what it sounds like. It means you're kind of summarizing. You don't want to drag on the story too much. So if you're telling a story and someone says get to the point, like come on, what's the point of this story? You could say, well, to make a long story short, blah blah blah, whatever. To make a long story short, I ended up losing my job. To let's see which one. How about on the ball? On the ball. If you're on the ball, that means you're doing a good job. Like you're on top of things is another phrase you might hear. On the ball just means like you're doing everything. You're a good employee. When something needs done, you're doing it. You're doing it correctly. I like this one. Speak of the devil. We say speak of the devil if we were just talking about someone. Like let's say you and a friend are talking about someone and you're talking and that person that you're talking about shows up. You would say, "Oh, speak of the devil." Time flies when you're having fun. This is another one that pretty is pretty literal. Just means when you're having a good time, time seems to go very fast. And let me tell a quick joke. I got this out of a book from when I was a kid. And so this phrase is time flies when you're having fun. But the joke was there's two frogs talking to each other and one frog says to the other, time's fun when you're having flies. So in other words, when you're eating flies, then you're having fun. I've tried to explain that joke to some non-native speakers before and they didn't understand it, or maybe they just didn't think it was funny. To get bent out of shape. To get bent out of shape means that you got mad about something. Something happened or someone said something and it made you angry. Under the weather. Under the weather means that you're sick. So someone might say, "Oh, why haven't you been at work the past few days?" And you could say, "Oh, I'm under the weather." And this usually means you just had a minor cold. Usually it's not something more serious. It's usually a minor cold. You just didn't feel that well. You would say, "Oh, I've been under the weather the past few days." We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. This is one that means that you don't need to skip ahead. In other words, let's say you're doing a project, you need to focus on what the next step is. You don't need to worry about something that's going to happen down the line in a month or two. You say, so you're aware that there's something you'll have to do, but you say, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, meaning we don't need to worry about that right now. We have other things to do first. Then when we get to that, that's when we'll worry about it. But there's no use worrying about it right now. Okay, on to some more. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I like this one because I work as a bird biologist. So a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And this would have come from the days when people hunted birds. So in other words, a bird that you've already shot and you have is better than two that are still in the bush that you haven't gotten yet. So in other words, one thing that you already have is better than two things that you might get but you might not get. A penny for your thoughts. I'm trying to think. This is one that we hear a lot growing up, but usually it just means like someone's giving their opinion. And there's a lot of different phrases that involve like like money. Another one is let me add my 2 cents. That means like let me give my opinion. Let me give my thoughts on this issue. Let's see. How about a picture is worth 1,000 words? Again, this one's pretty literal. It means that if you had a picture of something, it's the equivalent to having 1,000 words to be able to describe it. Here's another bird related one. Birds of a feather flock together. So, birds of a feather is kind of a strange phrase, but it means birds that are the same type or birds that are the same kind. Birds of a feather flock together. Flock is a noun that describes a group of birds, but it can also be a verb, meaning when birds group together. So, birds of a feather flock together means that birds of the same kind stay together. But for the phrase, we mean it for people. So, people who are similar, maybe similar in personality, or who have similar interests, they tend to hang out with each other. Comparing apples to oranges. This is something, let's say you're debating someone and they try to make a comparison between two things, but you want to tell them that those are two very different things. You would say, well, you're comparing apples to oranges. In other words, you're comparing two things that you really can't compare because they're not the same thing. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. This is a phrase that means, well, literally, it would mean just because you have a certain number of eggs that your chickens have laid, that doesn't mean that all of those eggs are going to hatch and become more chickens. So, same thing. Let's say you expect a certain business deal to come together or you expect things to happen, but it's not a definite thing yet. Well, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Don't assume that they're going to happen just because it looks like they are. Wait until they actually happen. Every cloud has a silver lining. Sometimes you'll also hear this as every dark cloud has a silver lining. When I was growing up, my family had a boat, and it was just a small boat, but we always we wanted to give it a name, and my dad said, "Well, let's call it Silver Lining because of the phrase every dark cloud has a silver lining." In other words, everything that's bad has some part of it that's good. So a dark cloud has this brightness around it. So he was basically saying work is the dark cloud. Spend all his time and energy on work, but the boat is the silver lining, or the boat is the reward. So every dark cloud has a silver lining. Every bad thing has a little bit of it that's actually good. Get a taste of your own medicine. This means basically, let's say you were treating other people very badly, or you were doing something that other people don't like, and then someone goes and they do that same thing to you. People would say, "Oh, you got a taste of your own medicine." In other words, someone did to you what you do to other people. It ain't over till the fat lady sings. This is a phrase, I guess it comes from opera, where you have I'm just reading the chat. Someone says that a lot of these idioms are also found in Spanish. And yeah, I found that with a lot of languages, even with Chinese, there's a lot that are a direct translation. So um, it would be interesting to know how many of them are ones that were borrowed from other languages and how many were people came up with independently just because it's some universal truth of life. But anyway, where were we? It ain't over till the fat lady sings. I guess this comes from opera. That's what I've heard anyway, that at the end of opera, like the last song would be the fat lady singing. At least that's the story that people use to explain this. But in other words, um, it's not over until it's over. So if it hasn't ended yet, then don't. You know, things can still happen. You hear this a lot with sports. People saying it ain't over till it's over, or it ain't over till the fat lady sings. In other words, especially sports like baseball, where no matter how far behind you are, you can still rally and come back. Sports that rely on a clock, not so much, because if you get ahead a certain amount, there's no way the other team can catch up. But other sports like tennis or baseball, it doesn't matter how far behind you are, you can still catch up. Look before you leap. This basically means don't take action until you've sort of thought through what your plan is. Their definition on this website is take only calculated risks. In other words, if you jumped without looking, you might fall into a pit or something. So always look ahead and make sure your plan is going to work, or that it's realistic before you jump in and try to do it. Once in a blue moon, actually, I think the definition is that a blue moon is when there's a blue moon is the second full moon in the same calendar month. So that happens, if you have a full moon on, let's say, the second of the month, you would have another full moon on the 30th. So it's not very common that there would be two full moons in the same month. So when you say something happens once in a blue moon, you just mean it's something that happens rarely. It happens, but only very occasionally. To play devil's advocate. Advocate would be someone who speaks on behalf of someone else. And so in this case, you're speaking on behalf of the devil, which would be sort of the negative side. So when someone plays devil's advocate, what it actually means is that the other person is giving an opinion, and this person is giving a counter opinion to that. And it might not even be that they believe that counter opinion, but they're just going through the process. They're playing devil's advocate. So they're saying, okay, I understand what you said, but what about this? And what about this? Like, these are the rebuttals to your argument. So how do you explain that? Slow and steady wins the race. Again, this one's very literal. It basically means, well, let me give an example for language learning. Slow and steady wins the race. Let's say you study the language 1 hour every day. It's just a small amount every day, but you do it day after day after day. And so you end up making a lot of progress. Compare that to what I sometimes end up doing, which is I'll study the language for 5 or 6 hours for a bunch of days in a row, and then I'll take 2 weeks that I barely do anything. So who ends up farther ahead? The person who does 5 hours or 12 hours in a day, but then takes a bunch of days off, or the person who just constantly studies 1 hour a day over and over. So basically, it just means if you want to do something, just do it consistently day after day with a moderate amount of effort. And over time, you'll come out ahead of people who do a lot of effort and then take a lot of time off. Do a lot of effort, take a lot of time off. Here's another bird one. And actually, this is related to a quote that I posted on Hello Talk within the past few days. And this one is, the early bird gets the worm. So if we think of birds, a lot of birds are active early in the morning. Here in the USA, we have a bird called the American robin. And they're sort of known that they're the bird that you see in your yard, and they're picking worms out of the ground. So in other words, the robin that shows up early, he's going to be the one that gets the food. So the meaning of this phrase is that the person who is early is going to be the person who is able to be successful because they get the opportunities. If you wait, you might miss out on an opportunity. Here's one that I don't actually know the origin of, but it's the whole 9 yards. And this basically just means the whole thing. I'm trying to think of an example. So if someone upgraded, let's say someone upgraded their car and they put in a new stereo and they put in new tires, new wheels, and just like really made it fancy. You could say they went the whole 9 yards, meaning they did like everything possible. It'd be interesting to know what that origin is. There's probably something in life that's 9 yards long, and that was the complete thing. That would be interesting to look up. Don't judge a book by its cover. This one's pretty self-explanatory. If you have a book, I have a book here. Now this book's pretty boring looking. You could say, well, this book's boring. It doesn't look like any good. Well, don't judge the book by its cover. It's about the contents of the book, what's inside. So this phrase basically means for people. Don't just look at someone or look at a situation and discount it based on the outside appearance. You have to get to know the person the same way you would have to look at the inside of the book to know what it's truly about. A stitch in time saves 9. I had a pair of gloves that I was wearing all fall, and one day when I took them off, it ripped. And a stitch in time saves 9 means when that rip is small, to fix it would only take 1 stitch. But if you let it go and you ignore it, it's going to continue to rip and rip and rip more and more each day. So by the end of it, you would need a total of 10 stitches, right? The original 1 plus 9 more. So a stitch in time saves 9 just means take care of a problem when it first happens, when it's small, because if you wait, then it's just going to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and be harder to fix. Actually, this is the book I showed. Someone said the inside must be boring. It's the Stories of Ray Bradbury. It's a short story collection. Ray Bradbury is an American author who, well known for some novels like Fahrenheit 451 and Dandelion Wine, but a very prolific short story writer as well. Definitely check out his works if you've never heard of Ray Bradbury. And most of his writing isn't too difficult, so it's definitely something that English learners can read. A lot of it was aimed at either children or people of all ages, but his writing isn't too difficult. Other than there might be a few old-fashioned words just because he was writing most of these more than 50 years ago. Let's see, what else? A lot of these aren't really that interesting. How about haste makes waste? Haste makes waste. Haste means when you do something quickly. It means like urgency. So haste makes waste means if you do something quickly, that the result won't be that good. You won't do it. It won't be the quality that it would have been if you took your time and did it. So haste makes waste just means slow down, take your time, and do it correctly. That way you'll finish with a product that's good quality. To hear something straight from the horse's mouth. To hear something straight from the horse's mouth. This means this is the opposite of hearing something through the grapevine. If you hear something through the grapevine, it means you didn't hear it directly from somebody. It means like somebody told someone else and then they told someone else. It's just a rumor. So you've heard this rumor. But if you hear it straight from the horse's mouth, that means you heard it directly from the person. It takes two to tango. Tango is a type of dance. And so, literally, it's to do this dance, you need two people. It takes two to tango. Usually, what this means, I'll give you an example. There's a guy I know who this summer he had met another guy, and they were going birding together a lot. Birding is the hobby I'm interested in, bird watching. And he started birding a lot with this guy, and then it ended up they kind of they weren't friends anymore. Just some situations. The one guy was lying, something like that. But my friend, he wouldn't let it go. So he was kind of making the situation worse himself. So it wasn't all the other guy, it was also him. So when you say it takes two to tango, it's like it's not just the other person's responsibility for the situation, it's also yours because of your reaction to what they did. Once bitten, twice shy. Once bitten, twice shy. You could imagine literally, like, let's say you got bit by a dog, you would be more cautious when you're around dogs from then on. So this phrase, once bitten, twice shy, just means if you've had something bad happen to you once, then you're going to be a lot more cautious in the future to make sure it doesn't happen to you again. Maybe even overly cautious. Through thick and through thick and thin. Through thick and thin. This means through good times and through bad times. Don't ask me which is which. I guess thick would be good times and thin would be bad times. Through thick and thin. So you could say, his wife stuck by his side through thick and thin. So it just means through the good times and through the bad times, she stayed with him. When it rains, it pours. So pour means heavy rain. So when we say when it rains, it pours, we usually mean this regarding a bad situation. It's like when a bad situation happens. Well, we would say this when a bad situation happens and then it gets worse. Like it's not just a little bit bad, it's a lot bad. We say, well, when it rains, it pours. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Again, this one, the literal meaning is pretty straightforward. But it basically means you can't force someone to make the right decision. So let's say I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where people are trying to help out homeless people, and they'll go and they'll give the homeless people they'll go and they'll help them get a haircut, and they'll buy them new clothes, and they'll set them up in an apartment for a couple months, and they might even help them get a job, right? Try to help them get back on their feet. But in the end, the homeless person ends up kind of blowing it. They don't take advantage of it. They fall back into their old ways. And so you could say, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. In other words, you can set up the perfect situation for a person, but in the end, it's their own decision of what they actually do. Do they make the best of it or don't they? Okay, it's been about 30 minutes and I'm at the bottom of the list, although I skipped quite a few. So maybe we'll have to do a part 2 sometime. But thank you all for watching. This was sort of a test live stream for me. So I hope everybody enjoyed. And I'll have to figure out if I want to keep doing more live streams. I really enjoyed doing this one. And I see that there's at least a handful of people that have watched throughout, so that's more than I expected. I expected to just be here talking to myself, but definitely stay tuned. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. I have a number of different videos about different parts of English listening, from me telling stories about my own life to most recently I've done some like IELTS or other standardized exam speaking practice. So check out those videos if you haven't, and keep an eye out for more live streams. And hello to everyone who is watching me from Hello Talk. I know I have a lot of friends on there. So once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Have a good night.